welcome to Getting Your Money's Worth. I'm Judith West, and our guest today is George Orefici, financial planner and consultant, financial consultant with MetLife. Thanks for being on the show.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, now that we got past that, I can relax. George, we've had lots of financial planners on, and after all, the show's called Getting Your Money, but you have a special niche with MetLife, and that's this Center for Special Needs Planning.
Correct.
Tell us about that. I've never even heard of it before I read about you.
Well, around 1998, there was someone that worked for MetLife, and she had 2 children that had special needs, and more often than not, she was finding that other parents that she was congregating with either had therapy sessions, perhaps horseback riding therapy, things like that.
Right.
Nobody really had a clue about what kind of planning that they needed to do. And so it was a grassroots organization that started back then, and since then has evolved over time. And there are planners across the United States that somebody that has a special needs dependent could give a call to by just hitting the website or calling the number.
And that's your particular specialty.
Right,
there.
correct.
Okay, so tell me something. Why do people with special needs need special planning? Well,
there's a couple of reasons. One is that if they're not really able to take care of themselves, they have caregivers. And if something happens to the caregivers, who's going to be advocating and taking care of for the dependent with special needs? And I'm saying dependent as opposed to just child, because it could be somebody that's 50 years old with Down syndrome and their mom and dad is 75, or it could be somebody with a young autistic child. But so we need to be concerned about if something happens to the caregivers, number one. And number two, there are certain government benefits that they're eligible to receive if they do the planning the proper way. So,
and that's Social Security and Medicaid.
Social Security, Medicaid, could be food stamps, things like that, various asset, income, and means-based type testing.
Right. Okay, so someone who has a special needs child or spouse or a dependent that is concerned, I mean, I thought that people like that, I mean, they might say to a family member, if something happens to me, but is that a good idea?
Well, it depends. Are you talking about the money or who would take care of them?
Well, I suppose both, to tell you the truth.
Well, we'll look at both things. If it was you saying, well, I have a brother or a sister that could step in and take care of my child, that may well be the case. However, maybe they're going to be giving up a job of their own and they're supporting their family. How are they going to get paid if they're going to be taking care of this person? We're asking them to take on a whole new financial responsibility. And so oftentimes we'll involve a life insurance policy that can be invested, generate compensation for a caregiver. That's one case scenario. The other case scenario is that the disability might be such that it requires a lot of either medical training or what have you, and maybe that person's skill set isn't there, or they're not even involved in their life at this point.
Right. Yeah, and I suppose the other thing, too, is when you talk about everything is, I mean, nobody knows anyone's destiny. Even, no matter who you designate, could also have an accident. Something could happen to that person, and
absolutely.
And they would be unable.
Which is why, you don't just plan once, you plan and you continue to plan. The laws change, family dynamics change, the ailments may change.
Okay, so there is something called does this involve a lot of legal stuff?
It can. There are a couple of documents that you're going to want to have, and one is the kind of the cornerstone of the situation is something called a special needs trust.
Okay.
Special needs trust is real important. Also, something that's not legally binding, but a drafted document called a letter of intent, and I can explain what that is. And then certainly when a child with special needs turns 18 years old, regardless of their cognitive impairment or disability, they're considered an adult and can take care of themselves unless you plan otherwise. So you need to apply for guardianship for your own child at that point.
Without regard to the person's cognitive ability?
Because the courts are looking at it as if they're giving up a lot of their rights if they allow somebody else to be the guardian.
So let's go slow. So let's go back to this special needs trust, you call it. Yeah. In what ways does that differ from any other trust? Okay,
well, it's specifically designed to supplement, not supplant, any money that somebody would get from the government. So, for example, let's say that grandma and grandpa pass away and they want to leave money to all their grandchildren. If they leave it to the child with special needs, if they have more than $2,000 in their name when they reach the age of majority, 18 years old, they're not going to get any of those government benefits until they spend all that money down for that.
So even that includes their inheritance from grandma and grandpa?
It could be money that they earned in a lawsuit, money that mom and dad are putting away for their education, money they inherited.
that will eliminate them from receiving any benefit.
It'll prevent them from getting it until they spend their money down to that threshold.
And the way to avoid that is?
If you have the money go directly into a special needs trust, they can enjoy the fruits of that money. They just don't technically own that money. So both they can utilize the money that's in there via a trustee spending money.
Who would own that special needs trust? Whoever,
it's just a trust. It's just an entity, and there's a trustee who controls it for the benefit of that person, right?
So that could be a lawyer or a bank, or
it could be a mom or a dad or a
whoever's named. Right. Mm-hmm. Okay. So that takes care of that, and this letter of intent is pretty obvious. What
that is basically, it's almost like a letter of instructions, and depending on the disability, somebody might do it in writing, and in the writing it might include who the doctors they use, the medications they like, a doctor they would never use, things that their child likes to do or doesn't like to do, things they hope for them socially. Do they want them to get married? Their routines basically. Because if you just thrust into the situation and don't have any idea what to do for this person, it'd be good if you had something.
So, why?
If it's something that involves needing medication or a certain, an injection or something like that, you might do it in video format so that somebody could see it rather than reading about how it gets done.
Yeah, I never thought of that point of view.
Absolutely.
And I suppose also, even if you want to leave instructions or extra money for like some recreational activities.
Well, that's the whole idea behind the trust, because if you can have that money and you can give the little extras or the therapies maybe that aren't covered by health insurance.
Once a year, if you want to make somebody happy, a special needs child, take them to Disney World.
Disney,
or
vacations, iPods, whatever it may be, clothes above and beyond what you would normally get from Social Security.
Yeah. Now, is that money in the special needs trust taxed?
Sure, it would be taxed depending on the level of income that was in the trust.
Right. Okay, and there was a third thing you said.
About becoming a guardian.
The guardian,
Those are the three things really.
Right. So, how do you? So what if? So how do you? I don't understand this business of the guardian. Go slow with that. So an impaired child, we'll say, physically, someone physically impaired or disabled certainly has a voice of for him or herself.
We would be more talking about someone that really can't take care of themselves.
So you're talking someone who has some kind of a
Down
neurological
syndrome
or some kind of a brain damage or something like that.
Oftentimes when dealing with, let's say a parent and a child, and the child, we include them in on the conversation or on the planning simply because they have a right to do that.
Yeah. I mean, also this would then include, it's not just congenital, someone born, but if God forbid a child or an adult is in some kind of a car accident or swimming accident or something, that would fall under this same.
Absolutely.
That's the same genre.
Right. The problem with something, let's say, via a medical malpractice or a lawsuit or something along those lines, is that we could put the money in the trust and the money could be utilized to help pay for those extra things in addition to what Medicaid and Social Security would provide.
So MetLife has this center, and they do that. What do you advocate for MetLife? Or does it involve life insurance or some kind of insurance?
Right. Well, what we'll do is we do workshops first of all for parent organizations, special education groups. I've done them for Fortune 500 companies because you'd be surprised statistically how many people have dependents with special needs.
Yeah,
so we do workshops to get the information out, just like I'm talking to you now.
Right.
When we do an analysis or a fact find, so to speak, we find out what the needs are, what maybe the plan of care is going to be for this particular dependent. What's going to happen? What's the family dynamic? Who's going to come in and so forth? And help them kind of raise their awareness that they even have to plan.
That they even need to.
Because they might not even realize they have to plan.
Exactly. Right.
And then, of course, if something happened to the caregivers prematurely, life insurance certainly would help because money would create a state where one didn't exist. What if I became disabled and now I can't work to help pay for those little extras? Disability insurance usually is something. And then long-term care is actually becoming more and more a need because, as I mentioned before, somebody might be 75 years old and have a 50-year-old Down syndrome child, but let's say they develop Alzheimer's or some other kind of impairment.
Right. What happens then?
Okay, so the assets that the parent thought that they were going to use to help take care of their child for the rest of their life now has to be used on their care. So instead what we do is we utilize the insurance to pay for their needs now and can still leave their estate intact.
So you use like a long-term care insurance.
Right, so disability insurance, long-term care insurance, and life insurance are very, very important tools.
Right.
Unless you have plenty of money where it's not an issue.
I suppose even if you have plenty of money, without regard to how much money, if there are benefits available, that things should be structured so that the person gets the benefits that are there for everyone without regard to income level.
And even if they do have plenty of money, they see the value or the leverage in the insurance.
Right, and also certainly leaving a legacy.
Yes.
And leaving a guardianship.
Right.
It's interesting to me that you that there's so much of the population like this that would be enough to keep, a whole center going all over the country.
Statistically, I mean, it's not the only thing that I do, but it's a very big part of my practice. And it was big enough to start a whole center for special needs planning.
Right.
But yeah, there are roughly 20 million families in the United States that have a dependent with special needs, and that's only kind of growing. Yet only 10% or so of them have actually planned. A lot of times it's because they don't know what they're supposed to be doing. They're anxious about it. It's an overwhelming type of a topic.
Well, I think it is. And also, life insurance itself is anxiety producing.
Right. Yeah, you have to talk about your mortality and so forth. But the reality is that we have to be concerned about if something happened to you yesterday, who's going to take care of my dependent? Who's going to advocate for them? How am I going to pay for these things? Right.
And also, the other thing is, too, which is that with this increased longevity, listen, people that are disabled, are special needs people, they live longer, too.
Absolutely right. I mean, it would never be that somebody that had a Down syndrome child, they thought that they would outlive their child, but it's happening. And I have a client of mine, it doesn't always happen that way either. I have a client of mine whose son developed Parkinson's disease at a very late age. He's 65. She's 89 years old and is taking care of him.
And she has a 65-year-old son with Parkinson's
Correct.
disease.
And he was a physician. And I said to her, let me ask you a question. What's going to happen with Marty when something happens to you? And she's like, well, that's a good question. She's not even thinking about it, and she's 89 years old. And I said, I wish her a long life, but let's, be realistic.
Is it ever too late to start to
Never.
do something?
No, of course not.
George?
Absolutely not. It's better than doing nothing. That's for sure.
No matter how late it is, it's better. It's better than doing nothing.
Obviously, the sooner you start, the more choices that you'll have later on, the more peace of mind that you can ultimately have. And also, I should mention that you need to include pretty much anybody that's in their life, because you have to let Grandma and Grandpa know and Aunt Mary know that if something happens to you and you're going to leave something to my dependent, he's going to become ineligible if you're leaving the money to him directly. So we have this special needs trust that the money can go into. He can enjoy the benefits of it, but we can't have him own it directly.
And then can the education be paid for out of the special needs trust? So
sure, as long as it's for the benefit of the child or the dependent.
Right. So that's another way if you want to give a gift for college savings or a private school. That's another vehicle.
Absolutely.
There's another vehicle for doing that.
The trust just protects it and allows you to get all the benefits as well as the money from it.
Right. Yeah. Well, listen, none of us want to have to think about a special needs person in the family, but from what you say, there are plenty of those that do.
Absolutely.
And I think it's a very good service that you do for those folks who sometimes don't even know they need it.
No, you're right. You're absolutely right.
So we thank you for being on the show.
Oh, my pleasure.
You've told folks who have special needs in their family we'll tell them how to contact you, and really where to go to get an education.
Great.
Okay.
I'm happy.
Thanks again for being on the show. I'm Judith West, and you're watching Getting Your Money's Worth. Our guest was George Orefici. I did it once. Orefici, right. MetLife. Thanks for watching.